Travels of the Ellis Arbor is an audio narrative set in the world of Bastion using 5e compatible characters. A dark fantasy world of chaos, intrigue, magic, and mystery. The story, setting, and sounds are written by Lonomy and published by lonomy.creative. Tune in for episode 20, Retribution. No less than 30 seconds after the conflict erupted, the victors were revealed upon the floor of the Pleiades Cathedral. Blood stained every curtain. Every stone was cracked and warped. Veins of arcana shone still from where the ground was struck. Only the remnants of violent displeasure lingered still. Darian spat a command into the air, and his crew responded with unmatched acuity. Edward ducked behind the captain, just in time to see Arvel reach for his crossbow, firing from the hip toward Darian. A vibrant bolt of blue electricity arced from the barrel of Pulse and struck Arvel square in the shoulder. Scores of blue light shot downward toward the hand that gripped the crossbow. Struck by immense pain, the lightning arced toward the tip of the bolt and shattered what otherwise was a robust wooden frame. In absolute anguish, Arvel hurled what remained of his magical crossbow into the air, clutching at his now blackened hand and eyes wide, turning toward Killian. The leader of the band hadn't even turned to look at this display as his eyes were fixated on the text in his hand. No sooner than the lightning had subsided, blackened occult words dripped from Killian's mouth as warping, transmutative magics began to encircle the lifeless form of Mollesby. In retaliation, Darian's pistol turned toward Bisc. 2 shots fired, though neither hit their mark. Instead of landing squarely into Killian's open hand, holding the necromantic book aloft, the now rising form of Mollesby obscured him. And with a sickly thud, both bullets sunk into the corpse's side, now oozing with a dark crimson, but with little more than a subtle shift in response. Moore and Carpathian stepped forward now, both prepared to protect the captain at all costs. Both of them began the process of incantation, preparing spells that would devastate their adversaries. The wizard began to utter a dark chant as white, scalding hot lines of arcana wreathed the floor beneath him. At the same time, Moore grunted and began to squeeze their body with all their might. Dancing spores of red and gold began to burst from their hood and float gingerly around their frame. And finally, with a sharp intake of air, they began to draw the spores back into their body, the means to begin their transformation into a much larger, more brandish creature. And as blood poured from the bullet holes on his brother's side, Mercurial screamed with a shrill, mortified wail, drawing a hefty, jagged hand axe from his belt and hurled it toward the captain. No sooner had he made his mark known, it was Nout who stepped forward into the action. With a brief wave of his hand, his floating disc responded, shooting across the floor and interposing between Mercurial and Darian. One heavy thud and a crackle of arcane energy, and the hand axe sunk inches into the disc, protecting Darian from harm. And with that, Nout leapt through the air toward the altar, where the form of Mollesby continued to rise, now feet from the altar's top. With grace, Nout pulled a handful of oddly shaped stones from his pocket as he looked upon the still, broken form of the brother. And what occurred next was a sight of ungodly, unearthly, and unutterable description. Killian, having finished his incantation, shut the necromantic book with a proud, gleeful look. And from the many wounds across his mortal, dangling frame, gouts of bright, eerily colored crimson began to burst forth from Mollesby's corpse. All within the chapel shielded their eyes, hoping to not be caught by the virulent spray in their eyes or mouth. That was, aside from the now agog, mortified, and utterly broken face of Mercurial. What was once a crimson spray now formed streams like wet tendrils, tentacles that formed from the fountain of blood that gushed from Mollesby's wounds. For a moment, they grabbed and grappled at the air until they caught what they were searching for. A singular, wet tendril grabbed hold of Mercurial, still pained and shrieking at what had become of his brother. And wrapping tightly around the brother's face, the tendril pulled, with a sudden, unexpected might. A sickly crack as it tore through Mercurial's flesh. Now both the older and the younger, Molesby and Mercurial, bound in these tendrils of splayed blood and flesh. A mortifying scene as each other member present ducked for cover, hoping to limit the amount of crimson they would collect upon themselves. But as their forms began twisting and turning, drawn together in a sick machination of a dance and a transformation, the now engorged form of Moore, stalwart and unnerving, interposed between the crew and the abomination before them. Reaching toward the mass of flesh and blood, they grabbed at the whipping tentacles, wrapping it around their arm and expressing sharp thorns from their body. In response, the mass of both Mercurial and Molesby writhed as they were pierced by Moore's thorns. Grabbing the tendrils with both arms, the myconid behemoth pulled at the floating mass, drawing it back toward the altar. And still enraptured by the scene, Killian drew backward a step or two, entirely covered in the viscera of his two companions. With his right hand now empty and outstretched, he grabbed at the open air in front of him, summoning his heavy, magical hook from the ether. And with a sharp brandish, he turned toward Darian, still shielded by Nout's disc. "Do you not see how the lady has blessed me? Blessed all of us. She favors us. She favors me. How can something of such beauty and magnitude be of anything other than the Lady of Blood? Tell me again how you think she would have disdain for life such as this. I will bring them back. I will make them new. Killian Bisc, rewarded for living an idyllic life as an orphan, risen to the rank of scion of a goddess." Killian's ramblings were torn from him. The more he shouted, the more the mass of flesh and tentacles continued to lift and rise, though it was just enough for Darian to now see a clear opening. A moment. A target. With one hand, Darian pushed the floating disc out of the way and stepped briskly toward the altar. Killian's face turned to see the captain, now standing calmly at the opposite side of the threshold. A sharp inhale of breath as Killian attempted to interpose the altar between himself and the captain, though, in all his hubris, he was not quick enough. Darian's face turned as he winked an eye shut. Gripping his pistol, he held it aloft, squarely aimed at Killian's vest, and tearing across the cathedral with a shrill, unnatural bang. A bullet sliced through no less than 3 tendrils before sinking deep into Killian's chest. Bisc, with his hook still aloft, was sent reeling feet away from the altar and tumbling backward toward the crux of the chapel. A clunk rang through the air as the hook hit the floor with a heavy slam. The incantation ended, and the infernal spray of crimson began to wane. Worse still, with nothing to suspend it, the mass of flesh that resembled the forms of both Mercurial and Molesby began to plummet, suddenly from the air. And with a hot splash of crimson, it rolled off the edge of the altar before splaying forth across the cathedral floor. The stone now imbued with what remained of both the younger and the older brother. Quietly now, stepping round the altar, Darian's pistol was matched with that same cool, steely grimace as he approached the prostrate form of Killian. Inches away from his fingers, Killian grasped for the weapon, but lacked the strength to hold it aloft. And with a spit of hatred, he turned again to the captain. How could I have come so far not to be blessed by the lady? She came to my dreams. She built me from the ashes of my broken life. Does she not have her heart set on me? Who are you to tear me away from my idyllic life? The words lingered for a moment, echoing shrilly through the halls of the Pleiades Cathedral, before the captain responded. Did you not hear? She's fickle. Any joy you may have, she will devour. Any power you sustain, she will take for her own. Any conquest, success, or wisdom you obtain in your life, she will twist for her own ends. You never had a chance at that idyllic life, Bisc. It was hers to begin with. I know this. My joy belongs to her. A look of shock and confusion was drawn wide across Killian's face. He had learned of the true nature of his patron, but only in the throes of his hubris, the torment of his mad lust for power, had he understood the cost. He thought on the display of mutilated bodies of Mercurial and Molesby, on the shaking, skulking form of Arvel, now coiled in the shadows of a cathedral pillar. He thought on his time with them, however short it was. Finally, in a moment of clarity, his eyes blurred with tears, both of confusion and pain. His sight drew back to see the smoking barrel of Darian's pistol. Now sleep, wretch. One final burst of shrapnel, and the ringing of a firearm in the vast, empty cathedral. Blood still slick on the walls, and faces still turned in utter disbelief. Darian fired his final shot through Killian's skull. A quiet, unnerving reverence took the crew as the sourceless cackle of a woman finally subsided, and Killian's life left him. Travels of the Ellis Arbor is made possible by the generous support of our subscribers, followers, and most importantly, our patrons. Thanks to all our Moon, Wedge, Crown, and Hex tier patrons for supporting us so far on this journey. Please subscribe, give a like or a comment, follow us on Twitter, and stay tuned for the next episode. Don't forget, take care of each other.